What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Friday, everybody. Okay, so today there was no Doomer Friday on the night shift, so that's why you didn't see us there. But that doesn't mean that there isn't any Doom to discuss. And it's not something that I particularly like to discuss. I am part of the Doomer Fridays because the conversations are really cool. I love all of those guys, and I don't think we get too doomy, really, honestly. So the thing is, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but recently things are kind of starting to escalate. Over the last week alone, the drones came back. Drones, I don't know what they are. They kind of seem like drones to me, if I'm being completely honest. I know that people like Ross Coulthard and others are saying that these are definitely UFOs. I'm not going that far yet because some of them do seem mechanical. Some of them do seem like, yeah, advanced tech, but nothing anomalous, really. That's just my opinion. I will show you a couple of clips. But that's one. The other one is that Secretary of Defense, who's now apparently the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, called for a massive meeting at Quantico next week for every single high ranking officer within the military of the entire country. First of all, who gave him that stupid idea? Why would you put every single military person in one single spot when tensions are so high right now? That seems like a recipe for disaster. So I don't know what this is about. I don't know if he just wants to give them like a new Department of War kind of 101 class, but it's really stupid. I'm sorry, but it is. And warmongering is also very stupid. And that is something that the US has been doing for the last few months alongside other countries like Russia, China, and it's really bad right now. So, what do we need? Let's just remember that old speech from President Ronald Reagan at the UN, yeah?
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? 2 centuries ago, in a hall much smaller than this one, in Philadelphia, Americans met to draft a constitution. In the course of their debates, one of them said that the new government, if it was to rise high, must be built on the broadest base, the will and consent of the people. And so it was, and so it has been. My message today is that the dreams of ordinary people reach to astonishing heights. If we diplomatic pilgrims are to achieve equal altitudes, we must build all we do on the full breadth of humanity's will and consent and the full expanse of the human heart. Thank you. God bless you all.
So that speech tells you a lot. It tells you possibly, and this is for the conspiracy theorists out there, that, yeah, there may be something already among us. If you're fully into conspiracies and you fully believe that hybrids are a thing and that there's already an NHI presence among us that is sort of driving all that's happening right now, you could go that route. You could also go that route of Ronald Reagan just saying that war is terrible and that division is terrible, that we need to come together. There's people that only took it as such. But he did mention an alien presence, and he did mention that what would happen and how fast we would all come together if an alien presence was announced. And that's where the biggest conspiracy of all stems from, which is the famous Project Bluebeam conspiracy that everybody talks about. I'm not going into details. You already know what conspiracy I'm talking about. But given how high the tensions are right now, I was happy to see Matthew Brown's latest Substack. And I'm going to read it to you guys because I think it's important. I think this is coming from a former Intel official who is privy to a lot of information regarding these programs, allegedly. And he is using his knowledge to try and brainstorm a little bit of what would be better for humanity moving forward. And his solution is naturally that the best way to mend divisions between two of the biggest superpowers that are now in high tension geopolitically would be to disclose between both of them. Because apparently, and this is something that is also in the Age of Disclosure documentary, there is an arms race for the technology that Dylan Borland recently mentioned because he knows about it. That's what he said. And if somebody like him, who is not really that high up within the totem pole, knows about it, that means that the powers that be, that means that the heads of state definitely know about it. We have Trump already mentioning the US has weapons that are unmatched. He said it. Russia has said it too. Putin has said that too. So this rhetoric needs to come to an end. And what would be the best way for peace? Let's hear what Matthew Brown has to say and see if you agree. So on the Invisible Frontiers Substack, Matthew Brown writes, "A grand bargain for peace. Why US-Russia talks must begin with disclosure." Written by Matthew Brown. This is a famous picture. It's called the Apollo-Soyuz handshake in space in 1975. These are astronaut Deke Slayton from the USA and cosmonaut Alexei Leonov from Russia, which was the Soviet Union back then. Matthew writes, "On quiet frontiers, our world order is perilously close to systemic collapse. Localized wars backed by foreign powers have metastasized into early phases of industrial scale warfare. In Ukraine, military technology and operations have accelerated in leaps and bounds of bloody innovation, only to return to the brutal logic of attritional trench warfare. In Israel, the powers of the modern surveillance state have created a hellscape watched constantly by roving robotic eyes and backed by conventional overmatch. Once more, humanity has been forced to seek refuge beneath the earth." This is a wild, wild statement. But if you look at Gerb's work, all that he's written, all that he's done about the DUMBs, the underground facilities, seems to track with this. In Yemen, Venezuela, Myanmar, the Himalayas, Central Africa, and South China Sea, the flames of conflict are stoked by rival intelligence services and organized crime. I would add Mexico too, a distinction almost no longer worth mentioning. Great power rivalry has been offshore to territories considered fair game in the sandbox, quote unquote, of geopolitical competition, and on quiet frontiers now echo with the drums of war. Division, hatred, and bloodshed, long simmering at the frontiers of empire, have rebounded and are tearing apart domestic populations long accustomed to peace. What looks like a world map of separate flashpoints is, in reality, a single system under intense strain. Decisions in one theater reverberate instantly in the others through alliance commitments economic warfare, foreign military assistance, and shadowy wars waged by security services. Between the modern arsenal of destruction and the speed of telecommunications, our margin for strategic error has evaporated. The old habit of managing crisis through proxies and deniable actions, the so called third option, quote unquote, of the foreign policy establishment is failing in real time. The root cause is trust, and the complete lack of it between the great powers of our time bodes extremely ill for peace. Without trust, deterrence fails, alliances fray, every flashpoint becomes a potential spark, and shared perceptions of reality diverge. This is a map of the Russian strategic and non strategic nuclear forces that Matthew Brown shares here. And then he continues: the eagle and the bear. If we keep treating each fire as discrete, we will miss the accelerant that links them. The foreign policy consensus in Washington has failed. It has been dead for years, yet its corpse is paraded as consensus by special interests to maintain the illusion of success. Something new is desperately needed. Staying the course will very likely lead humanity to a third global war between powers armed with advanced weapons of mass destruction, yet still subject to simple human failings. The task for statesmen and all leaders anxious about the near future is to recognize that durable de escalation between antagonistic great powers requires deep structural change, not more rounds of crisis management and diplomatic ostracism. Among today's conflicts, none is more perilous than the war between the United States and Russia. And make no mistake, the quote unquote war in Ukraine is not a peripheral dispute, but a direct confrontation. Despite Washington and Brussels' ritual denial, the scale, duration, and depth of involvement leaves no honest alternative description. Billions in US and European weapons flow into the Ukraine. American satellite data and electronic intelligence guide Ukrainian strikes. NATO trainers and special operators rotate through the theater. Sanctions and covert action target the Russian state directly. These are not the hallmarks of neutrality. They are acts of war waged on a proxy battlefield. Our blood price is paid by Ukrainians for now, but the contest pits two nuclear superpowers against one another in everything but name. Any serious student of history recognizes that the quote unquote Cold War was never truly cold. Covert operations, proxy wars, and direct confrontations defined that era, and our present is no different, only faster, riskier, and more volatile. In an age of perception management and social engineering, large segments of the public and much of the foreign policy elite cling to the comforting fiction of unprovoked Russian aggression, while ignoring the reality of an undeclared US Russia war already well underway. This picture is called Concept of Deterrence, US Strategic Air Command from 1961. And then Matthew continues: despite the proclamations of familiar talking heads, Russia's conduct is best understood as the natural reaction of an authoritarian regime to what it perceives as strategic encirclement, amplified by long historical grievances with both the EU and the United States. Moscow's war is neither a simple bid to resurrect the empire nor a mere opportunistic grab for resources. For Putin and the Russian elite, Ukraine represents a last ditch defense against a NATO frontier that, in their eyes, crept past every promised line and violated the spirit of every treaty. Whether one thinks of that claim, it is the ground truth inside the Kremlin, an axiomatic reality that tired rhetoric about a quote unquote rules based order cannot dislodge. America's difficulty in sustaining trust is not limited to adversaries, from the Kurds left exposed to ISIS, to Afghans abandoned to the Taliban, Washington's treatment of allies in proxy wars has repeatedly eroded our integrity. If those who bled on America's behalf cannot trust its commitments, how much less can rivals be expected to gamble their survival or assurances? The erosion of trust abroad now mirrors the fraying of trust at home, and both converge in the breakdown of diplomacy. Because of America's asymmetric advantage in alliances, Washington has been able to offshore this conflict to the people of Ukraine, who fight as proxies in its geopolitical struggle with Moscow. Russia has no such luxury. It bleeds its own soldiers and depends its own treasure on its own doorstep, a burden that is becoming increasingly unsustainable. The Russian state has already signaled its willingness to risk escalation if the United States refuses to come to the table. Meanwhile, Washington's central interest in the sustaining and meat grinder in the East is reputational. To preserve its standing as a security guarantor among allies is to deny Russia a chance of regaining the influence it lost with the Soviet collapse. In short, Washington fights for pride, the Kremlin fights for survival, and the war goes on. Matthew continues. A concert of diplomacy. Direct military conflict between superpowers armed with arsenals scarcely conceivable to the public and even to most government officials is anathema to the core interests of the United States. Facts are facts. Both Russia and the United States possess the ability to end human civilization many times over. From the perspective of both survival and basic human decency, Washington can no longer maintain its strategic refusal to recognize Moscow as a peer to be engaged on its own terms. The price of this hubris is being paid every day. Any viable negotiations with Russia must engage three interlinked domains of geopolitics: strategic stability, how we avoid inadvertent war; arms control, the means of war we limit, verify, and shape; and alliance management, what security guarantees and deployments look like at the frontier. Diplomacy that skips these domains in favor of photo opportunities or pre-packaged concessions will not survive first contact with geopolitical reality. And then Matthew shares a painting of the Congress of Vienna from 1814. He continues, none of this is new. The concert of Europe after the Napoleonic Wars, the arms control regimes of the Cold War, the détente agreements of the 1970s, all demonstrated same principle. Diplomacy succeeds when great powers recognize one another as indispensable partners in maintaining an overarching objective, mutually assured survival. Such arrangements are not built solely on trust, but also on mechanisms of verification, balance, and candor. They work not because adversaries become friends, but because they agree that survival requires cooperation, even in the absence of affection. Diplomacy has always functioned as the ballast of international order because it reduces uncertainty. The concert of Europe stabilized the continent after Napoleon, not by eliminating rivalries, but by acknowledging them openly and agreeing to manage the points of friction through constant communication and balance. During the Cold War, the same principle applied. Arms control treaties succeeded not because Washington and Moscow trusted one another, but because each side accepted the need for verification and transparency over the very arsenal that threatened mutual destruction. In both cases, diplomacy worked when the real sources of instability were dragged into the open and structurally addressed through negotiation. Today, however, the most destabilizing source of strategic rivalry between the United States and Russia remains outside every official framework. The parallel, secret programs dealing with phenomena and technologies of unknown origin. Unless this hidden domain is recognized and brought under diplomatic management, every other negotiation on strategic stability, arms control, or alliances will be doomed to collapse under the weight of secrecy and paranoia. And then the key, according to Matt, is for more than 70 years, Washington and Moscow have pursued extremely secret efforts to understand and contain phenomena, technologies, and intelligences not of conventional terrestrial origin. These programs, unacknowledged in public, protected by extreme secrecy, and distributed across state and private hands, have profoundly shaped military planning, intelligence priorities, and strategic perceptions in both capitals. The result has been a creation of parallel societies, our visible world of governments, cultures, institutions, religions, and sciences, and the hidden world populated by elites with access to technologies of unknown origin, often linked to anomalous intelligences, whose properties exceed our capacity to replicate. Maintaining this dual reality has long been one of the few areas of tacit cooperation between Washington and Moscow, though today even that fragile equilibrium is breaking down. Pride and animosity have eclipsed whatever pragmatic motives once justified secrecy. The race is now about who can first crack the science and master the capabilities concealed within these discoveries. Here lies the long concealed origin of the Cold War's most dangerous competitions, the core secret guarded with lethal force by both governments. As long as each side chases absolute advantage in this shadow domain, peace between the United States and Russia will remain impossible. I don't know what this image is, but it's really interesting. It's titled Nuclear Flashes of the Coast of Africa, Booms off U.S. East Coast, Flashes over the Atlantic of Southwest Coast of Africa, detected by Bella satellites. Many other tests, incidents. It doesn't say the year, but there it is. And then Matt says, disclosure is therefore not a boutique issue of political economy. It is a systems problem, fracturing the international order at its foundations. Secrecy on its scale breeds paranoia. Each side assumes the other has made breakthroughs it cannot confirm, and deterrence signaling becomes schizophrenic. With the public deliberately kept ignorant, national security elites speak in contradictions. Alliances grow brittle, and partners are included or excluded by degrees, and distrust festers in the absence of candor. The fracture between America and Russia is thus not only geopolitical but metaphysical, institutional, and generational. Until both sides reconcile decades of lies and hidden knowledge, every attempted deal will be built of shifting sands. Past eras stabilize only when rivals face their true sources of power. In our age, that means confronting the hidden threats of anomalous technologies and intelligences, or else no peace can hold. Towards a grand bargain. History teaches that durable peace between rivals comes from bold bargains that cut to the root of each side's grievances. Russia does not have to be our enemy, and much larger problems confront us at home and abroad. It is long past time for a new generation to sit down at the table and settle our differences. That was a shot at the gerontocracies of the world, by the way. The familiar building blocks of a US Russia bargain have long been identified by scholars in both countries. The first is NATO membership restraint, which is a formal halt of further expansion for a defined period, combined with a tailored security assurances of non members. The other one is NATO force posture. This is a removal or relocation of specific advanced US systems near Russian borders, paired with reciprocal transparency and inspection rights. The other one is territorial settlement. It is a difficult but final status package on contested areas, tied to demilitarized corridors, economic guarantees, and humanitarian protections. Then there's the arms control reboot. It is a replacement for broken regimes with a scope that reflects today's reality. Advanced nuclear weapons, strategic directed energy, next generational biological warfare, artificial intelligence, and the militarization of global commons, space, ocean, and seafloor. And then there's the economic reconciliation, which is bounded sanctions relief, calibrated energy trade, and guarded reentry into global finance for clearly defined sectors. For the old guard and those invested in perpetual conflict, these are costly concessions, but the expected value of converting Russia from active adversary to respected competitor and eventually to a partner against existential risks far exceeds the upfront political pain. What makes a grand bargain hold is not sentiment, but mechanics. Diplomacy reduces uncertainty, solves commitment problems, and stabilizes deterrence. The greatest reservoir is of uncertainty in US Russia relations no longer sits in declared arsenals. It sits in the hidden contest over anomalous technologies, sensors, and phenomena. So long as that domain remains off the table, each side plans for the worst. Ambiguous incidents are misread, alliances fray, and stockpiles swell. Mutual cooperation on a sequence disclosure campaign acknowledgement, verification, and shared incident management directly addresses those failures by building trust. More than that, it reframes rivalry and collaborative stewardship of a dangerous, long hidden domain. This widens the domestic space for agreement, strengthens allied confidence, and creates new expectations of restraint. Disclosure cannot ride as a sidecar to US Russia negotiations. It must set the frame for the rest of the bargain. That requires a theory of change with discrete, measurable steps. Step number one is conflict termination, ceasefire parameters, humanitarian corridors, monitored drawdown windows, escrowed economic packages tied to compliance. Number two is a bilateral disclosure dialogue, secure channel, cross designation of points of contact, inventory of compartments, harm minimization protocols, and joint red lines. Number three is next gen arms control, expand beyond legacy WMD to include emerging systems, stand up a next generation cooperative threat reduction program to verify, render safe, track, and mitigate the proliferation of anomalous technologies. Four is trilateral strategic forum. No bargain is durable without China at the table. I was wondering about this. Its arsenal, industrial base, and role in global supply chains give it veto power over any new strategic norms. A trilateral forum would set limits on the most destabilizing technologies, establish a no first use commitments, and create shared channels for early warning and incident deconfliction. Then number five is safe civilian disclosure. This is face public releases with safety reviews, scientific consortia, standards for handling materials phenomena, sanctions for illicit exploitation. This sequence is the only plausible order in which the dominoes fall without toppling the table. First stop the killing, then carve out space for candor, constrain destabilizing weapons, widen the frame to include China, and finally bring publics into full awareness of non human intelligences, technologies of unknown origin, and unidentified anomalous phenomena. Done in this order, disclosure strengthens rather than destabilizes the system. Only by placing disclosure at the center of the process do these steps cohere into a durable architecture of peace, rather than a patchwork of temporary fixes. A bargain anchored in the disclosure asks leaders to exchange secrecy for stability, rivalry for stewardship, and suspicion for trust. That is the true price of peace in the 21st century. Turning point. Disclosure will not dissolve ideology, erase animosity, open borders, or rewrite the past. What it will do is restore the missing precondition of peace, trust that the other side is negotiating in good faith. With that foundation, conflict resolution, arms control, economic relief, and even scientific cooperation can stand on stable ground. The alternative is appalling. A war between superpowers would not confirm their perceived advantages, it would shatter them. War will quickly disabuse both sides of their delusions, and the cost of education will be incredible devastation. To persist in concealing non human intelligence, technologies of unknown origin, and anomalous phenomena is to gamble the future under the false belief that total information dominance can still control escalation. That arrogance echoes the hubris of past eras when leaders believed they could manage war, only to watch it spiral beyond their grasp. The enemy always gets a vote. History teaches that it is not prosperous rivals we should fear most, but failing states with nothing left to lose. It is in moments of desperation when survival itself hangs by a thread that leaders are most likely to reach for catastrophic options. Disclosure reduces that desperation by removing the veil of suspicion. But no nation can attempt disclosure alone. Both American and Russian elites know this, even if they dare not say it. Catastrophic disclosure can only be prevented through joint action, coordinated steps by Washington and Moscow, and eventually with Beijing as well. This will not happen overnight. It will demand bitter arguments and painful promises, but it is possible. Our nations have cooperated before, securing nuclear arsenals, converting warheads into fuel, eliminating diseases, and opening new frontiers of science. We can do so again. But the choice before us is stark: to face the truth together or to let denial drag us into disaster. The truth is already here, and it will not wait forever. God damn. That gave me chills just now. And Matt is completely correct. I don't know if you guys remember when Dylan Borland appeared in that UFO Twitter space. And this like can be trickled down to the state in the UFO community right now. That division can be translated to what's happening between Russia and the US. And what Dylan Borland did when he jumped into that Twitter space was that he begged basically both sides that are like now bickering and fighting and doxing each other and harassing each other to try and find the common ground. And this is something that Matthew Brown is doing right now as well with this piece that is very powerful. And this is the solution that he believes could potentially be achieved. And I don't know what you guys think about it, but let me know in the comments. I'll be reading. Do you think that it's possible for the US and Russia to sit down at a table and finally put everything in there? Let each other know which secret programs they've been advancing on for decades now. I do know that the Russian program is way stronger when it comes to psi phenomena, psi abilities, ESP, all of that, because they have decades ahead of the US. And the US potentially has a lot more time ahead of them in terms of potential reverse engineering of these craft. So, could it be possible that instead of an arms race, we could sit down in a table and just talk about this and the constant conflict and the confusion, because there's a lot happening in the world right now, and it's so volatile that just lighting up a fuse could have catastrophic results, and it is really scary. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I wish that this piece could reach the eyes of the world leaders so they know that this is a viable solution for peace instead of like just waltzing towards World War III. Maybe talking about how together we can move the world and civilization forward. Isn't that more exciting? But then again, I don't know how much influence whatever NHI is here has on all of this violence. We should also think about that. Food for thought, right? Thank you, Matthew, for such a powerful piece. Keep looking up, yeah? As my friend Clint says. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to like, hype, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's all you need to do in order to help us, and it is what helps us the most. So thank you. But if you want to support us in other ways, there's a few links down there you can choose from. You can become a member on YouTube, or you can support us through KGRA. Anything you choose to do is always appreciated, so thank you. That's it for me today on this video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay curious and inquisitive like Matthew Brown, always. And this goes to Chris Ramsey, who just suffered a massive loss in his family. My condolences from myself and from the entire Psicoactivo family. Stay strong, brother. Bye.